Hello, my name is Frank Juan and welcome to Schools on Point. This half hour we'll be talking about some of the major issues impacting schools and public education, locally here in Southern California and across the state. With me is Dr. Arturo Delgado, the Los Angeles County Superintendent of Schools. He's the county's chief education official and through the Los Angeles County Office of Education serves 80 public school districts that educate 2 million preschool and school-aged children. Joining us today is California State Controller Betty Yee. Ms. Yee was elected to the State Controller's office in November of last year, following 2 terms of service on the Board of Equalization. As Controller, she continues to serve the board as its 5th voting member. Now serving as the state's Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Yee also chairs the Franchise Tax Board and serves on the boards of the California Public Employees Retirement System, CalPERS, and the California State Teachers Retirement System, CalSTRS. These 2 boards have a combined portfolio of nearly $500 billion. Ms. Yee has more than 30 years of experience in public service, specializing in state and local finance and tax policy. Welcome, and with that, let's begin. Well, Controller Yee, those are pretty big numbers that we've just heard.
Yes.
You have a great deal of experience working on state budgets, so if you can just tell us, the term state controller is not necessarily one that people would readily understand. So what does the state controller do, and how do your experiences in state government finance really help you in accomplishing this role?
Sure. No. Well, it is not a common household term, controller, but I think the best way to describe the role of the controller is that the controller minds the store for the state of California. So essentially serving as California's chief fiscal officer as well as an independent fiscal watchdog, really keeping an eye on the flow of revenue receipts as well as being sure we have enough cash to make all of our disbursements in a timely manner, and that's very important to school districts, especially when budgets get tight. And also being responsible for overseeing that every public dollar is being used according to law and is not subject to any waste, fraud, or abuse. And we do that through audits, and we do that through just ongoing cash management and through financial reporting so that we can be sure that California's financial condition is well known at any point in time.
Pretty much minding the store.
Very much minding the store, yes, yes. And my 30 years of experience has been exactly doing this. I was a former state budget director in a prior gubernatorial administration. I've spent many years in the state legislature analyzing bills with fiscal impact, working on state budgets, and then more recently spent 10 years on the State Tax Appeals Board. And so my broad range of fiscal and finance policy, I think, I feel like I've been in training all my life in preparation for this job.
We've been hearing that the state budget is looking pretty bright for schools, at least in the 2014-15 year, because of these good news, higher than expected projected revenues that are happening. So that would mean, as you mentioned before, some good news for schools
Yes.
and also community colleges. So let me direct this to Dr. Delgado. How might this good news about this increased state revenues really help schools during the next few years?
Thanks, Frank. In January, the governor proposed an $8 million investment in the new funding for schools. And under the Prop 98, which guarantees a minimum level of funding for schools. And while schools are now operating under a new funding formula called Local Control Funding Formula, or LCFF, as we commonly refer to it, many are still restoring the programs and services that were lost during the Great Recession period. So this increase will help expedite that process. In terms of what this may mean for the rest of the state budget, analysts point to several scenarios that may result in less spending in other parts of the state budget.
Let me bring this up because the Analyst's Office, or Legislative Analyst's Office, it's a bipartisan office, they came out with a report that said that higher revenues in 2014 may produce a budget problem in 15-16. Yeah. So how does that work out? That to me is a little confusing. Good news here, but bad news later on.
Right. Well, the structure of the budget is such that when we do have higher revenues coming in, it will mean that the general fund revenue contribution to Prop 98 funding for our schools will increase, and that's good news. That's good news. But what it does is that it rebenches that level for future years. And so as we go into the next fiscal year, it may be to keep up with that funding level requirement that it will really add pressure to the budget. And we're not even talking about the non-98 side of the budget. And so that's, with all things staying constant, we're going to see some pressure just in keeping up with that increased funding level for Prop 98 school funding.
Is that what Dr. Delgado meant when he was talking about the fact that this will have impact on other parts of the entire budget? It's not just education, but
That's
there
right.
also
That's
will
right.
feel in other areas?
Yes, other non-98 parts of the budget includes higher education, how we fund our California State University and the University of California, healthcare, our social services, as well as our corrections budget.
Ms. Yee, let me switch gears for you
Sure.
on you just a little bit. And you've often spoken publicly about the importance of education in your life.
Absolutely.
Share with us why education is so important. You share some stories with us. We'd like to hear them.
Sure, and I think my story is not really unique in many ways, especially given the changing demographics of California. I'm the second oldest of 6 children born to immigrant parents from China. And really, as I grew up, didn't know a word of English until I entered public schools. And I don't know that I would be sitting here as a state constitutional officer, but for the quality public education that I received in my native city of San Francisco. And really for my siblings and myself, education was really the door that opened up so many opportunities for us. We're all college graduates, and several of us have advanced degrees. But I say this because so much of what I believe is should be a priority, and what keeps California ahead of the curve in terms of just being a global economy is that we need to sustain our investment in public education. And I believe I'm a living example of what good things can happen. So I love sharing my story because I think certainly given the children that we are seeing in our schools who are children of immigrants, this is the investment that we're making in them.
Very good, thank you.
Particularly because the state continues to be more and more diverse
Absolutely,
as we go
yes.
along. Let me ask you this, because it's a bigger question. It talks about how we're governed, the legislature, and how the legislature can move California forward, because the state and actually the nation continues to meet the challenges of economic recovery. It's not
Yes.
quite as fast,
Yes.
I think, as we'd like it to be. It's better, but it still has a ways to go.
Yes.
So how can you work with the legislature in terms of moving the state forward and
Sure.
meeting these challenges?
Sure. I think what we have is we're seeing some very unprecedented, interesting developments with our economy. In the past, when we've had economic downturns, we've always relied on the construction industry and consumer spending to lift us out of downturns. And with this last Great Recession, it was really the housing industry that brought us down. And consumers were feeling very, very skittish, and some are still feel skittish. We haven't had a full recovery. In other words, we haven't had the economic recovery being evenly felt throughout the state. We have a growing problem of a widening income gap. And while we're gaining jobs, most of those jobs are in the low-wage service sector or at the very high income levels. But our middle-class jobs really haven't rebounded in our construction industries and our retail industries. And so I think in terms of the legislature, what they're looking to do is how do we try to bridge that growing divide with respect to income inequality and certainly the affordability gap that we're seeing, particularly in the area of housing. And also looking at just trying to be smarter about hopefully reinvesting and having sustained reinvestment in our education system, which really is what's going to keep California ahead in terms of being able to prepare a workforce that will be able to take on the economic opportunities that are facing us.
You know, when we opened the program, I mentioned that because of your position as a state controller, you remember the California State Teachers Retirement System,
Yes,
CalSTRS, as I
yes.
mentioned. Now, there's also a piece of legislation, and maybe this directly applies to this CalSTRS issues, because this legislation, I think it's AB 1469,
Yes.
it's meant to bridge the funding gap within CalSTRS, which I think stands at about $74 billion. That's a huge,
Yes.
that's a big figure in anybody's book.
Yes.
So how can that legislation, and maybe you can talk about that legislation, help us out of the situation that we're looking at with CalSTRS?
Sure. So let me just speak about the unfunded liability for a moment. The unfunded liability really is attributable to a number of different factors. One, poor investment returns. Obviously, when the market is not doing well, the investment returns are not as robust as they are have been assumed to be. Secondly, when the returns have been robust, it has been a pattern on the part of the state to not continue with our share of the contribution into the system. So in other words, we took a contribution holiday. And so all this adds up to where now we have an unfunded liability. And 1469, the bill was intended to really address that unfunded liability over a 3-decade period. We have to look at it over the long term. This is not something we solve overnight. And really, as a fiduciary on this board, my job is to be sure that we have the funding to pay all the benefits that have been earned by our educators. And so as I look at this, it's really 1469 was a wonderful agreement by the state, by school districts, and by the CalSTRS members to each make a commitment to pay more into the system to work down that unfunded liability. I do think, though, even though we gave school districts time to ramp up for their added obligation to pay more, it will create a lot of pressures on the part of many school districts, because we also have a factor affecting school districts where they have to adhere to required reserve caps. And so with the reserve cap and then this new added responsibility, there's just going to be a bit of funding pressure that will be experienced by school districts in the near term.
Well, let me ask Dr. Delgado, from your perspective as the county superintendent of schools, how's addressing the CalSTRS issue actually, in a sense, help school districts? Because does this allow them at least to better plan their budgets in the years ahead in terms of dealing with this?
Well, it's always good to know ahead of time what the expectation is going to be. It's definitely a burden, only in the sense that these added dollars to the CalSTRS accounts for teachers is something that wasn't originally looked at for as a potential liability in the future that would be ongoing. So unfortunately, teachers look at that and they do expect to have districts pick up the full cost of their share of it, and we also want to make sure that our teachers are taken care of, right? So part of that piece is balancing how much does a district really invest in it. How much is that? Do they try to put on the table when it comes to taking it off the table, should I say, when it comes to trying to determine how much additional pay raises teachers would get, and because all of this is all figured into the same dollar amount, right. And so it'll create some challenges that way. But at least we now know what's expected. And this particular bill, AB 1469, will be a big help for us.
Do you think that in some ways it actually now begins to better kind of add some structure to this, or kind of a blueprint in a way, so they can better address this? Because it's such a big figure that I think in the past people have just said, oh, it's too much to try to deal with. But now at least this is the beginning of a way in which to approach it and then help school districts as well, because whichever way the planning goes, at least it allows now for some more planning, as Dr. Delgado said.
That's right, that's right. I mean, if unaddressed, it would really build up to be a very untenable liability that I don't know what proposal could really make some significant improvement to the ability to pay the benefits to our educators through the system. So it is, I think, a beginning. I do think, and I agree with Dr. Delgado, it's there'll be some pressure points, because every dollar that now is going to be focused on adding contributions on the part of school districts to this is less for other purposes in the classroom. So, and it's, but it was an agreement, and I think all parties recognize that unless we address it, it will just become a much more difficult liability to address.
Missy, what are your thoughts on state and school borrowing and the governor's focus over the last several years to reduce our state debt?
Sure. It's the most fiscally prudent thing to do, and certainly as a controller, I welcome that. It is, as we pay down debt, even though in the short term it may mean less dollars to go to other parts of the budget, in the future it will free up resources. And so, and particularly as I look at the State General Fund, which is such a big contributor to our K-12 education budgets, is freeing up those resources in the future so that as we address these liabilities, we have more discretion with respect to what to do with these dollars that are freed up in future years.
And when we talk about dollars, you usually wind up talking about debt.
Yes.
In some way or form.
Yes.
Now, the governor has proposed a new approach to school facilities construction and modernization funding. I think his proposal says that it focuses on the use of local bonds and not voter-approved statewide bonds. And those usually carry a significant debt service or a loan payment amount that is paid by the state. Now, this issue, though, I think, is that some districts have such low per-student assessed value that they really can't issue bonds at the local level, at least in the amounts that allow them to meet student and facility needs. So they need some help, which the governor's proposed plan would provide. Is that generally about correct, Dr. Delgado, in terms of how this is approached?
Frank, I think it is, and it would help in about 3 different main ways. First of all, it's targeting those that can't issue local bonds in the amounts that allow them to meet student needs, number one, but then prioritizing the funding for health and safety as well as severe overcrowding projects. And then finally establishing a sliding scale to determine the state's share of project costs based on local capacity to finance these projects. This would be pretty significant, I think, and it would help some districts. For example, prior to becoming the county superintendent here, I was the superintendent in San Bernardino City Unified School District in San Bernardino, one of the poorest communities, larger urban cities in the nation. Even being able to float a bond would not result in a lot of funds for us for the needs that are required for that community. So I think this would help. But let me get Controller Yee's thoughts on this and on this proposal.
Yeah, I actually agree as well, Dr. Delgado. It's a way for some of the districts that have traditionally been in need and not have the capacity to generate its own resources for facilities to be able to be in the mix, to have the state really lend assistance in this regard. But I also think we want to marry it to what I think has been one of the most significant governance changes in education finance, and that's with the local control funding formula that really, I think, instituted a lot of local engagement, and I don't see why that local engagement can't include facilities as well. And so I would hope that there will be more of a sense of confidence and trust that as that local process of engagement by the schools, the community, parents, the educators, actually identify facilities needs, that there will be much more broad-based support to approve financing for them.
You have the ability as a state constitutional officer to really serve as well as meet a lot of people in California. And I think, looking at what you stated very publicly before is that you'd like to demystify, I think that's the term you use, state finances and expand financial literacy so that more people understand what this is all about.
Yes.
Share your thoughts and think how you're going to go about doing that in terms of expanding the financial literacy piece.
Sure. Well, let me first just say each of us sitting here is a taxpayer. And I think as a taxpayer, and I certainly feel this way, I want to be sure that my tax dollars are in good hands. And I also want to know where my tax dollars really are being directed. And I think we've really have such a diverse array of funding sources for a broad array of services that as taxpayers we've lost sight of where our dollars really are going. And so certainly what we're doing with respect to state finances out of the Comptroller's office is trying to get information out on a regular basis with respect to whether it's our cash position, whether it's the amount of revenues we're bringing in, just so we have regular contact with the public about what's happening with their dollars and how much we're actually raising, and then painting the picture too on the budget side with respect to where those dollars are being directed. But I think in order for any average Californian to understand state finances, it really begins at the very, very personal level. We have in the Comptroller's office a very robust program around financial literacy. And actually, literacy is probably not even the right word. It's about just financial skills development and knowledge, because I think regardless of any discipline that we decide to pursue, that's just at the foundation of everything we do. Money drives everything in our lives, right? And so if we can actually have interest and engagement with respect to what's happening with our personal finances, we can then take that to the next level, translating what that means in terms of the dollars coming out of taxpayers' pockets, where those dollars are going, and hopefully engage them so that they can feel like they have a voice with respect to driving some of that public policy about how those dollars are directed.
Do you think your job would be, in many ways, a lot easier if people had a better fiscal understanding in terms of what you're just talking about, in terms of where the tax dollars go, as opposed to just saying, it's too big, I can't understand any of it, I just don't like doing it type of thing?
Well, I think a couple things. One, certainly if you have a fiscal background, it is much easier to understand, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think it's really about staying informed and wanting to just do our civic duty. I consider that a civic duty, just to stay informed. And it's really our job as public officials to facilitate that engagement. And so while on the one hand, having fiscal experience would be great, especially since we're seeing so many fiscal decisions being made at the ballot box, and that is something that I don't particularly care for. We're asking voters to really approve or disapprove some very, very complex issues. So it does require a degree of understanding. But I would say, really, more importantly, it requires a degree of just ongoing engagement, civic engagement, really being able to have a pulse on what's happening in their communities, in their schools, with the state, so that they can see the relationship of how they're supporting their public services.
Make that connection then.
Absolutely.
Well, as a state's chief fiscal officer, we know that eliminating debt service is a priority.
Yes.
And in fact, you've expressed support for the governor's approach of paying down debt while calling for spending discipline. But in terms of what you'd like to further accomplish as state controller, what are some of your priorities? Share with those.
Well, we have in California a population that is becoming more and more diverse. We have an economy that continues to grow in its diversity. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing this recovery, even coming out of the worst recession in modern time for our state, is that we do have broad and diverse economic sectors. And so what I would like to see is really for our tax structure and our tax system to catch up and really reflect the 21st century economy. And so what I've just announced is an appointment of a 9-member Council of Economic Advisors to pursue their analysis of the tax reform proposals that are before the legislature. That's some that will likely come before the voters in the next election cycle. But to really start to begin the conversation about how do we update and modernize our tax system to reflect this 21st century economy that's very much no longer a goods economy, but a services-related economy, a knowledge-based economy, and so that when we look at how we assess our taxes, that we can have more sustained revenues, so we're not having to scramble year after year in terms of where we're going to find the dollars, and also look at how we can use our tax system to bring about more innovation. We're facing some significant crises right now in California with the drought, and also with global climate change. And I think the way that we're going to deal with that, and everyone's looking to California because we're the home of innovation, is they're going to look for us to really be at the forefront of developing those technologies and innovations that will help facilitate addressing a number of those issues.
Some big challenges ahead.
Big challenges ahead, but also exciting. And I think with every crisis, there's always opportunity. And I think all of us are doing what we do because we're eternal optimists.
You know, it sounds like the particular tax reform is this long overdue. We've heard about this in California for a bit, but is it now time with, particularly you're new, you have an opportunity, I think.
I do. It is long overdue, and of course it's very contentious, it's very political. There will be winners and losers anytime you talk about reforming the tax structure. But what my council will be doing is not coming to consensus about which proposals, but really looking at the structure itself. And what is it about the structure and what is it about the particular types of taxes really should be appropriate to put in place that is going to spur this innovation, this economic growth that we just talked about. So that when we talk about economic opportunity, it's just not necessarily confined to certain types of industries or confined to certain taxpayers, but that all of California can be able to benefit from it.
You know, that's a big task, it
Yes.
sounds like to me.
Yes.
Here's another one. Every time we have an election, it seems like the turnout gets lower and lower and lower. Is there anything that you foresee that could be done to help promote more engagement, particularly among young people?
Yes.
I mean, maybe it's that thing I said before about making a connection. How can we get better engagement to drive better participation in our election system?
Yes. Very, very critical. We only had a 42% turnout in this last statewide election, last November, the lowest in recent elections. And it is really our younger generation. And I know we have a new Secretary of State in office who is very much looking at strategies to do more robust outreach to that particular voting demographic. To look at, we do have now the ability for online registration. So what are the tools that can really facilitate registration? And then ultimately, if we can get through some of the security concerns, how can we have voting be more accessible for everyone as well? But I think part of the engagement really is about, I think, the way that we've been treating our younger generation. I often turn my nose up a little bit at the statement that people make when they speak to young people, and that is, you are our future. And so a little bit, it sounds like we're kind of deferring them. Well, the future is now. Future is now. Many of the issues that we've talked about today affects them, and they should have a voice in this. And I think what I've seen in recent years, particularly with the threatened tuition increases in our CSU and UC systems, we're starting to see a resurgence of youth activism in Sacramento, and so I think that's a good sign.
Can I ask about the other end of the spectrum? We touched on it a bit when we talked about CalSTRS.
Yes.
Pension liability.
Yes.
I mean, overall, not just associated with teachers or education,
That's right.
but
CalPERS as well. Yes.
overall.
Yes. Overall, we have well, in CalPERS, we also have multi-billion-dollar liability, not just on pensions, but also on retiree health benefits. And I know on the health benefits issue, particularly with state employees, that will be something that will be a point of discussion at the bargaining table between the governor's administration and the bargaining units with respect to wanting to look at pre-funding retiree health care, so we're not carrying that as a liability going forward. But it's a more complex system with CalPERS. We have many local employers, cities and counties, and some school districts, special districts that are part of the system, all with very, very different benefit structures. But at the same time, what I would caution is that this is something that we have to take a long-term view of, that these liabilities are not going to be resolved overnight. And again, as a fiduciary, at any given point in time, I want to know that there is enough liquidity in our assets to be able to pay all of the benefits. And that liquidity can come from building up our investment returns, or if we have to, really making some of our assets more liquid.
And you really wanted this job, right?
I did. And I have to say, I'm immensely enjoying it. Yes.
Well, there's so much more we could talk about when we come to the end of our program. This show is brought to you by the Los Angeles County Office of Education, a public agency dedicated to serving students, supporting communities, and leading educators. If you'd like to know more about the Los Angeles County Office of Education, you can visit us online at www.lacoe.edu. For questions, comments, or suggestions, you can email us at the address that you see on your screen. On behalf of the Los Angeles County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Arturo Delgado, and our special guest, California State Controller Betty Yee, I'm Frank Kwan, and until our next Schools on Point, thank you for joining us.